This is the first video of a 3-part series responding to an article published on the website Screen Rant in 2018. The article is called Lord of the Rings: 15 Things About Sauron That Make No Sense, written by Rose Graceling Moore. I have linked to the article in the description. In this article, the author makes 15 points about Sauron that are apparently confusing. Writers on sites such as Screen Rant seem to have a problem when it comes to writing about Tolkien's work. They will frequently claim to be great lovers of the Legendarium, but will confusingly mix adaptations of his work with the work itself. Throughout the article, Rose speaks of J.R.R. Tolkien's masterpiece, but mixes what she calls the lore of Tolkien with the Peter Jackson adaptation of The Lord of the Rings from 2001 to 2003. References are made to material that never appears in those adaptations, leading me to conclude that she really has read The Lord of the Rings, or at least investigated it for the article. Her confusion around Sauron then leaves me confused, as I fail to understand how someone can use the text to make certain claims, then ignore it completely when it comes to other claims. If there is one thing I want anyone viewing these videos to take away, it is that adaptations of Tolkien's material, no matter how good or bad they are, will not answer all of your questions, and that sites like Screen Rant cannot be trusted when it comes to writing anything about Tolkien that isn't directly related to adaptations of his work. In part 1, I will focus on 5 points. I will quote Rose word for word and then provide my response. The images used when quoting Rose are taken directly from Screen Rant and are themselves taken from Peter Jackson adaptations of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and in one case, the video game Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. I want to state here that this isn't an attack on the author herself, but just the content of the article. Let's begin. Number 15. Sauron becoming the Ring. The whole point of Frodo's journey is to destroy the One Ring, because it is only by destroying it that they can rid Middle-earth of Sauron once and for all, and prevent him taking over, of course. The ring is so closely linked to Sauron and his powers that he has essentially become the ring, which makes no sense. Sauron originally forged the One Ring, meaning that he existed long before it did. So why would the destruction of his evil craft project kill him? This is usually explained away by claiming that Sauron's use of the ring involved pouring his power into it and slowly becoming one with the object. But why on earth would Sauron choose to do that, if it meant that he was essentially creating his own kryptonite? One of the most fundamental aspects of the entire story is confusing to the author. Why would the destruction of the One Ring defeat Sauron? Why would Sauron make the One Ring in the first place if it would act as his own kryptonite? Rose dismissively says that Sauron's defeat is explained away, as if him pouring a great part of his spirit into the ring is some afterthought on the part of Tolkien. I apologise if that isn't good enough, but it is how it is, and Gandalf explains this in The Return of the King. For he will lose the best part of the strength that was native to him in his beginning, and all that was made or begun with that power will crumble, and he will be maimed forever, becoming a mere spirit of malice that gnaws itself in the shadows, but cannot again grow or take shape, and so a great evil of this world will be removed. Sauron poured the best part of his strength that was native to him in the beginning into a physical object. It is the externalization of his will, his power, into the physical world. If that object is then destroyed, the strength within it is lost to Sauron. He will no longer be in rapport with it. It will be destroyed or claimed by someone else. If he loses the best part of his strength, then he is maimed. If he is maimed, then he is defeated. He will become nothing more than a spirit of malice that no longer has the strength to take shape to trouble the world. Why create the One Ring in the first place? Sauron wished to rule the elves of Middle-earth, and aided them in the creation of rings of power, appealing to their own motives to heal the hurts of the world, to halt decay, and create their own paradise in Middle-earth, one that could hope to be compared to the bliss of Valinor across the sea. Sauron would then seek to control these rings, meaning he would control those who bore them. In order to do this, he needed to create a ring of power that was greater and more potent than the other rings. The power of the other rings would be tied to the one as long as it existed, and since they already contained great power themselves, Sauron had to sacrifice the greater part of his natural power and will into this object, creating the ring to rule the other rings, the ring of superior power. The elves forged rings using his knowledge and his techniques. He then forged the One Ring to dominate the rest. And much of the strength and will of Sauron passed into that One Ring, for the power of the elven rings was very great, and that which should govern them must be a thing of surpassing potency, and Sauron forged it in the mountain of fire in the land of shadow. And while he wore the One Ring, he could perceive all the things that were done by means of the lesser rings, and he could see and govern the very thoughts of those that wore them. This is not an easy process, and required a great sacrifice on the part of Sauron. It was a risk for a reward. With the One Ring, his power was enhanced on Earth, but with the added risk of utter defeat if the ring was taken by another of great will, or was destroyed. That power he placed within it was separated from him physically, and if that power was then taken from him, he could not recover it. His connection to that power would be severed. Still, why do it? Sauron never believed the One Ring would leave his hand. He forged the ring for himself, and it wouldn't have entered his mind that another would ever hold it or use it. It was the method he devised to dominate the greatest powers remaining in Middle-earth, to aid him in becoming the God King of Middle-earth, a power above the other powers. This is all explained in The Lord of the Rings, and in the Silmarillion of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. Number 14. So few ringwraiths. After creating the Rings of Power with the elves, Sauron gave 9 to the kingdom of men, and those who wore them became utterly corrupted and turned into the Nazgul. These ringwraiths were strange shadows of their former selves, riding on black steeds, and almost impossible to kill. The Nazgul became the faithful servants of Sauron, and in The Lord of the Rings they are sent to hunt the ring down. However, there seems to be no real reason that Sauron stopped at 9 rings for men. Rather than making dozens of the things to create an army of quasi-immortals, the elves did much of the forging themselves, but as the creator of the One Ring itself, Sauron clearly had the power to make more, yet he stopped at a handful and then turned to the orcs for his actual army. Another massive misunderstanding of the nature of the Rings of Power. The author assumed that Sauron forged the rings with the intention of giving some to the race of men. This is still a common mistake held by many who discuss The Lord of the Rings. 20 great rings of power exist. If we take away the One Ring forged by Sauron alone in Mordor, then we are left with 19 great rings. All 19 of these rings were forged by elves, with 3 of them, later known as the Three, being forged without the presence of Sauron, who had already left to forge his master ring. This leaves us with 16 rings, that were forged with the direct involvement and presence of Sauron in Eregion. There is nothing anywhere to indicate that these rings were going to be given to men. It was later, when Sauron went to war with the elves, that he learned where the 7 rings had been bestowed. And when Sauron recovered 9 rings and lesser works of the elves, there is a reason the effects of the rings are so different for men, as I discuss in my video of Rings of Power and Immortality. Here is what Unfinished Tales tells us about Sauron's recovery of the rings he helped to make. There, Sauron took the 9 rings and other lesser works of the Myrdain, but the 7 and the 3 he could not find. Then Celebrimbor was put to torment, and Sauron learned from him where the 7 were bestowed. This Celebrimbor revealed, because neither the 7 nor the 9 did he value as he valued the 3. The 7 and the 9 were made with Sauron's aid, whereas the 3 were made by Celebrimbor alone, with a different power and purpose. Rose then speaks of Sauron forging dozens of rings to give to men, acting as if the forging of a great ring of power is no more difficult than the forging of a blade. Sauron clearly had the power to make more. Says who? Such great works do not come without cost. Could Fëanor just make more Silmarils? Could Yavanna just create the 2 trees again, immediately after their destruction? Could Sauron just make another Master Ring? The elves poured their own desires into the rings, to end decay and change in Middle-earth. Sauron took advantage of their motives and aided them, but they desired to achieve their own dreams and goals with them. Sauron can't just go to Mount Doom and forge many of them. This is why he would recover rings that were already made, pervert them and gift them to others. They are artifacts of incomprehensible brilliance and are not trifles that can be made over and over again to just create some mass army of slaves. Number 13. Disappearing Ringwraiths. Another key issue with the Nazgul is that they seem to be very inconsistent servants of such a powerful Dark Lord, and certainly aren't used as much as one would expect, given their power and connection to the ring. In the Second Age, when Sauron created the Ringwraiths, it would make sense to then use them at every opportunity, but instead not a whole lot is known about what they did, beyond their initial creation as Sauron's servants. When they reappear for the War of the Ring, they still seem a little underwhelming. They fail to find the hobbits, despite being literally on top of them at one point, and after that they're more of a threatening presence than anything. Why weren't these guys taking point at every battle? I might have to say that this is perhaps a little dishonest. Rose mentions that the Ringwraiths weren't really utilised during the Second Age, but fails to mention that the Second Age is almost barren when it comes to content we can read about. We aren't told a lot about that time period in general. How do you know Sauron didn't use the Ringwraiths extensively during the Second Age? We aren't told a lot about what the Istari did when they arrived in the Third Age. Does that mean that they just sat around for a couple of thousand years? Absence of written accounts does not mean that nothing is actually happening in the world. We are told more about the Ringwraiths in the Third Age, especially the Witch King of Angmar, Chief of the Nine. He is a prominent figure in wars against the race of men. Again, it does not mean he was doing nothing in the Second Age. I'm sure the history of the men who became the Nine and their rise to power and corruption would be absolutely fascinating, but we just don't have that material to read. Why weren't these guys taking point at every battle? Well, there is the matter of the One Ring. The Ringwraiths are searching for it, which is far more important than leading armies. The Witch King does lead armies in the story, while others continue the search or aid him as needed. We should also remember that the chief power of the Ringwraiths lies in fear and not in battle prowess. I discussed this in my video of Ringwraiths and their power of fear. Sauron had countless servants that he could use for battle, but the Ringwraiths occupy the unique position of being the only ones he could rely on to return the ring to him if they found it. At length he resolved that no others would serve him in this case but his mightiest servants, the Ringwraiths, who had no will but his own, being each utterly subservient to the ring that had enslaved him, which Sauron held. Number 12. A ring forged to make other people invisible. The only power that the ring has that Frodo finds useful, rather than horrifyingly damaging, is its ability to make the wearer invisible. This is a particularly helpful thing, more than once, but begs the question, why did Sauron give it this ability in the first place? He forged the One Ring to control the others and corrupt the races of Middle-earth. Why would he need it to also act as an invisibility cloak? From scenes where he had a body and wore the ring, we know that it didn't make Sauron himself invisible. So why would he choose to give it the ability to make other people disappear? There is no possible advantage to that, and it makes it much easier for someone else to steal his most prized possession. Raises, not begs. But why did Sauron give the One Ring the ability to turn people invisible? Well, he didn't really, at least not in the way this is implied. The One Ring was made by Sauron for Sauron. He is not a mortal and exists in both the seen and unseen as an immortal spirit, a Maya. He has a perception of reality that would usually be beyond the ability of a mortal to comprehend. This is shared by the likes of Glorfindel or Galadriel, two figures of power who beheld the light of the two trees, and who would not fear the Ringwraiths or the unseen. Invisibility wasn't some power given to the One Ring. It was almost like a side effect of a mortal wearing it, wearing that object containing Sauron's spirit, except for dwarves, but that's an explanation for another day. It wasn't meant for mortals to wear. They would fade from the seen into the unseen, and if they used it often enough, they would fade forever.
A mortal Frodo, who keeps one of the great rings, does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues, until at last every minute is weariness, and if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes, in the end, invisible permanently, and walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. Yes, sooner or later if he is strong or well-meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good purpose will last. Sooner or later the dark power will devour him.
Gandalf explains here what happens to a mortal wearing these rings, the rings of immortals. This isn't some obscure parchment hidden on the Tolkien estate, or in a footnote of some minor essay in Volume 12 of the History of Middle-earth. It is explained in the second chapter of The Lord of the Rings. Mortals would fade into the other side, almost being unobserved by other mortals. Their lives would stretch without being granted new life. Sauron did not give the ring some Marvel Universe power of invisibility for his enemies to use against him. As you said, it didn't even happen when he wore the ring, because it was never intended for others, never mind mortals, to wear. Number 11. Gandalf and co. let him recover and build an army. After losing the ring, Sauron was dormant for many years, and finally reappeared as the necromancer of Dol Guldur. Gandalf managed to discover the true identity of the necromancer, however, and he and his powerful friends were able to storm Dol Guldur and drive him off. Without the ring, Sauron was weak enough that they could do this reasonably easily, and Sauron took refuge in Mordor. But given how weak he was, and that Gandalf and co knew where he went, there's no reason that the wizard wouldn't have hunted him down and destroyed him, or hunted down the ring and destroyed it. Perhaps Gandalf didn't know how to kill him, but at the very least they could have figured out a way to trap him, or to keep him weak, instead of leaving him alone to build an enormous army. Quite a lot of this is quite ridiculous, to be honest. Gandalf could have apparently have just hunted Sauron down and destroyed him. Apparently there is no reason why Gandalf couldn't have done this. The author claims that without the One Ring, Sauron was weak enough for them to do this reasonably easily. Let's look at this.
And the council put forth its strength and drove the evil out of Mirkwood. And that was the very year of the finding of the ring. A strange chance, if chance it was. But we were too late, as Elrond foresaw. Sauron also had watched us, and he had long prepared against our stroke, governing Mordor from afar through Minas Morgul, where his 9 servants dwelt until all was ready. Then he gave way before us, but only feigned to flee, and soon after came to the Dark Tower and openly declared himself.
This quote refutes the idea that Sauron was weak, or that he was defeated easily. Sauron was not in any way weak, and had always planned to return to Mordor. Sauron was not even diminished when he didn't carry the One Ring. He was simply not enhanced without it. The One Ring during the time of the Lord of the Rings still belonged to Sauron, and he was Lord. In what world would Mordor be easy for anyone to storm and defeat Sauron? Not only would it be difficult for anyone to defeat Sauron in direct confrontation, but they would have to assault Mordor to do it. After Sauron returned to Mordor, his enemies were powerless to go there and stop him. The Istari were also forbidden from matching Sauron's power with their own power. They are forbidden from directly assaulting Sauron. They are in Middle-earth to aid the people of Middle-earth in the fight against him. This is their charge, given by the Valar, in order to not make the same mistakes that were made in the past. I explain this in my video of the Valar and Middle-earth. When maybe 1,000 years had passed, and the first shadow had fallen on Greenwood the Great, the Istari, or wizards, appeared in Middle-earth. It was afterwards said that they came out of the far west and were messengers sent to contest the power of Sauron and to unite all those who had the will to resist him. But they were forbidden to match his power with power, or to seek to dominate elves and men by force or fear. As for why they didn't just go and hunt for the ring, Saruman was searching for it, as he wanted to own it, and he was considered the most knowledgeable in regards to ring lore in all of Middle-earth, below Sauron of course. As the head of the Order, he had the power and authority to overrule others, and to impart his wisdom upon them in these matters. This was at a time when he was trusted. Paying attention to chapters such as The Shadow of the Past, or The Council of Elrond, explains all of this. We uncover that Gandalf discovers at this time that the ring left to Frodo is the One Ring. Saying why couldn't they just go and find it and destroy it makes no sense at all, because this is the moment it is discovered. If they had found it earlier, then they would still need to go to Mordor to destroy it. Such figures of power could quite easily succumb to the lure of the ring. Why do you assume any of them would willingly destroy it, or could? Why do you assume Saruman would not just claim it first? Wouldn't it be a similar story, but just sooner in the timeline? It's a failure to grasp what is at stake, and the dangers of the One Ring, Sauron, and Mordor. Saying all of this makes it seem like finding and destroying the One Ring is an afternoon's work, instead of it being the main plot of a 6-book or 3-volume novel. Sauron wasn't weak. the wizards couldn't hunt him and destroy him, and they couldn't find the ring. They couldn't trap him. I could provide more quotes here, but simply reading The Lord of the Rings would help in avoiding needing to ask these questions, and would stop Sauron making no sense.